Well, since the fall of '71, and I believe at the end of this school year it'll be 48 years.
So almost since the beginning of Overlake?
Almost. School started in '67. The original campus was across the street from the main entrance in Marymore, up on the hill. It's called Redwood Manor. And then it moved from there to the basement of the Eastside Y, and my first year was the last year the school was in the basement of the Eastside Y.
What has changed most about Overlake since you started working here?
Oh gosh, probably the most significant change is just the physical campus. It's so much cleaner now than it was. I mean, we had dirt paths, and the parking lot wasn't paved, and why wash your car? It was going to be dusty at the end of the day. But the one thing that hasn't changed, which is the one thing that's kind of kept me here all along, is the close relationship between teachers and students. International trips, project week trips, coaching, all of that.
Are there any changes you would like to see made at Overlake based on your experiences?
Wow. That's a question I would have to think long and hard. I know there's some things I would like not to have changed.
What are some of those?
Well, those bronze words out around the flagpole would be, it would be sad if any of those changed, or if the school in some fashion were to work away from that mission and not support that. And I just can't imagine that happening, but you never know. So yeah, for me it's about keeping the heart and soul of the school. I think academically, the campus, things are always sort of in flux and change and gradually shifting here and there.
What do you think is the most important aspect or characteristic of this school?
I've always framed it in terms of the expression, the Overlake experience. When I'm walking off a soccer field, I can talk to a student about his or her research paper. And it's funny, mom and dad, who are often in a hurry to take Johnny or Susie home, would just kind of slow down and step away and let us have that conversation. Those conversations happen during homeroom. They happen during project week. They happen during office hours. It's not just about the 55 minutes or 75 minutes we have in class with a student, but it's about all those other intangibles, and I sort of lump those all into the Overlake experience.
Can you talk a little bit about the accepting nature and environment of Overlake? Has it always been this way?
My answer would be yes, though I'm sure there have been times for some students where they have not felt that way, and that's too bad. But we've always had, students have always called their faculty by their first names, and part of it goes back to a tradition is we're all in this together. And in the very beginning, literally, we're building the school. And I mean that quite literally in terms of there are some buildings, maybe no longer on campus, that students and faculty were working on during the summer to create spaces to teach in the next year. And so that's a characteristic that's kind of come from the old part of the school, that we're in this together. And, yeah.
How have the attitudes of the different generations of students that you've taught throughout the years changed?
Well, initially, the school was accepting a much wider, more academically, intellectually diverse student population. We had full-time tutors who were dealing with kids with very specific or undiagnosed at the time learning differences. That was one of the hallmarks of the school. So at a time when public schools didn't have alternative programs to assist those students, we were a place they could come. And over time, that program has shifted and morphed. The span of students who are coming to the school has narrowed. At the same time, parents have always had high expectations, but we're seeing more and more students. Students are driving that too, sometimes in a very positive way, sometimes in and not as positive in terms of, I'm going to go to Stanford or Harvard's the only place for me, and maybe it's not a good fit, and maybe it's not a place that they can actually achieve. So students have become much more focused on what they view as success in the classroom and outside of the classroom.
Would you say they're more grade oriented rather than?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And some of that is okay, and some of that, particularly for one who teaches ninth grade, that entry year in the upper school, is not.
What valuable projects or lessons have been around for a while, and what have their impacts been on students through the generations?
Well, Project Week would be number one. I mean, my first year, I think, was the second year of Project Week. Started by students.
Can you tell us the story of how it started?
Well, I was not here, but Bruce Fisher, who's in the original class of 72, he wanted to shoot a film. In fact, he still has connections with the school. And he wanted some time to do it, so he and a few of his buddies approached the head, Dean Palmer, and asked if they could take some time away from school. And to his amazement, to their amazement, Dean said yes. And all of a sudden the word got out that they were going to be missing most of a week of school to go shoot this film. They weren't really quite sure. It was called Make Your Own Point Day. And so all of a sudden other kids are like, well, I want to make my own point. I could do this too. And that gradually became Project Week. And one of probably the oldest institution at the school. That said, probably one of the ideas that's been around just as long is the fact that students can start something. And if it sticks, it's still around. Overlake Choir, my daughter was one of the first students in Overlake Choir. And now, at the time, I think there was 7 students, and now, I don't know, the room's full, 70, 80. They do international trips. Overlake Bowling, squash, Overlake Radio, wrestling, any number of baseball, any number of projects that students have wanted to start, and with faculty support have happened. Crew. I mean, we have national champions in crew, yet we no longer have our own crew program for a variety of reasons. And they were started by students who, with faculty support and interest, went out about doing that. Chess. I mean, it goes on and on, the number of ideas. We had Overlake cheerleaders for a while. Not my favorite thing, but they started, they had student sponsors, and off it went. I've always loved that part of the school. So if you have a passion to do something and you can get the support, you can do it within the confines of the school and get school support.
Going back to Project Week, when did you become dedicated to Uruguay?
Well, in terms of the Project Week piece, we had heard, Marion Sagano and I had heard that Frank was interested in, Frank Grijalva was interested in having some global service besides Cambodia. And there had been a trip to Ghana that didn't serve the needs of the school terribly well. It was apparently a great trip. And he was looking for something in Latin America. So through my contacts in Latin America, we had visited a school. My wife was given the opportunity to travel as long as she was bringing back materials to teach second graders about Latin America. And we were there for a wedding. We were up in the northern part of Uruguay looking for the amethyst fields.
What are the amethyst fields?
Amethyst stones.
Oh, yeah.
The purple stone. And we were lost. We had no idea where we were. We were pretty sure we missed the turnoff, which was back down the road a few kilometers. And we stopped, and my daughter, who was fluent in Spanish, got out to talk to the locals, and my wife kind of looked over to the side, and there were a bunch of little kids that had just come out for recess. She said, well, I wonder if they would let us come and visit. So realizing where we should have turned off, we pulled around to the front of the school and knocked on the gate, and they just threw the doors open. And 750 kids in 2 shifts, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. At the time, the largest elementary school in Uruguay, serving certainly a very poor population in that area. And so Marion and I offered this idea to Frank, and he paid for us to go down and set it up in 2008, and the first trip was in 2009 at that school. And we've continued to kind of adjust the trip each year. This year we did more with a Colegio Seminario in Montevideo in addition to Beijing Union. Yeah, it's been a pretty special trip each year.
Knowing that you have been involved with both sports and classes, how did the experience of being a coach differ from those of being a teacher?
I'm going to take a little different tack on the answer. My favorite thing to do was to have a student in class, to coach that student in a sport, be it tennis or soccer or at one time even basketball, and to have them in my advisory. I mean, I felt I knew the complete kid at that point. Obviously class, you're dealing with something that, intellectually I have to frame it out, and in terms of sports, it's about, how does this activity sort of end up in a player acquiring more skills and eventually working with teammates and heading toward some event. So it's similar in some respects. You've got some of the same kind of planning, but one obviously very physical, and where the class part of it is much more intellectual. So different in a way because of that, but not so different. But I love being able to do both of those.
What programs, classes, and athletic activities have you been involved with in Overlake throughout the years?
Oh gosh, I've taught 6th grade reading. That was a lot of fun. Had the entire 6th grade, half of them every other day. And that was kind of fun. I've taught 8th grade geography. I've taught 10th grade English. I've taught honors English to 12th graders. Basically, the only thing I haven't taught is the 11th grade, because I wasn't writing a lot of college essays.
Why have you stuck with Overlake for so long? Knowing that you've had the chance to teach at other schools with different environments, what is it about Overlake that has kept you here and teaching students for over 45 years?
Yeah, the emphasis on over 45 years. Well, I think your question could be inaccurate in one respect, that I've had other opportunities to teach elsewhere would have required me wanting to, applying, going through the interview process, and I never have. I came here, as I was telling you earlier, when I was 24 years old. The school was very, very different, smaller, and I was fortunate enough to be given opportunities in terms of planning curriculum, and in some respects, in the summertimes, literally building the campus with other teachers and students. So in that respect, the school kind of became mine, ours. And that freedom of responsibility in terms of knowing that, kids had to leave my classes being able to think and particularly write well was something I took as, very seriously. It's always been one of my, I hope, one of my strongest teaching attributes. And so for me, it was that freedom with that responsibility, and I was not interested in going into the public sector after my early experience there. And the only other private school that was conceivable at the time was Lakeside, and very, very different mission. And since then, there have obviously been a number of private schools, but even when the school went through some shaky times, it's tried to blow up twice, my therapy was to go back to my classroom and my kids, and I never regretted that.
Does Overlake feel like home to you?
Oh, it is home. There's parts of this campus that I can't walk on without going, I was here when that was built, or I helped build this, or, you know. And it's very personal, but at the same time, you know, I need to think of it in the context of it's not mine, it's the school's. I'm just fortunate enough to be here.
How have you kept up such a rigorous schedule throughout the years?
I don't know. I mean, at one point, I was coaching 3 varsity sports, teaching 5 classes. I was the only teacher on campus who had a telephone in their room because I was the athletic director. And so I had students trained, so if the phone rang, maybe you would have to go answer the phone and take a message or changes. And, you know, I had a student in every class who was kind of trained what to do if the phone rang, and the phone rang all the time. We had, you know, 160, 180 kids in soccer uniforms in the fall. You know, there were, 5 teams, 6 teams. And then I was coaching, you know, adult soccer outside of that. You know, and then when my son got old enough, I was coaching an adult women's team, his premier team, and then obviously coaching soccer at Overlake. I mean, it's just part of how I lived my life, was doing things with people I enjoyed doing things with, and yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a wife who was willing to juggle all of that and me at the same time.
Does it feel like
Because she worked here for 13 years, and so this was our family. We traveled in '73 to Europe for 48 days with 7 Overlake students. And when we get together, you know, those are kids who are in their 50s now. And so when we get together with them and talk about that trip, you know, there's so many memories we have from that trip.
What was that trip a part of?
We had a teacher who ran, it was called Voyageurs, and they traveled, she would take a group of kids to Europe and travel around Europe. And she was doing her master's, and we took that trip for 1 year. We took over that trip. And we stayed at pensions and, you know, Eurail passes. And we did England and France and Switzerland and Italy and Germany and Holland. And, yeah.
Wow. Does it feel more like work or fun for you, having so many things to do?
Natural. I'm not one to, I don't sit well, particularly if I'm bored. If I want to sit and reflect on something, that's different. But I don't sit well when I'm bored. So it's just kind of natural.
What type of student do you find easiest and most enjoyable to teach?
Well, obviously students who are willing to work hard and do everything I tell them to do.